Hello, and welcome to the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards monthly educational program. We're glad you're here. When I saw the list of participants, there were so many from across the state, which is really wonderful, as well as, a lot of our Charlotte friends that are here. We are, as our name implies, located in Charlotte, and you can see on this slide where we have our web page, which is charlottewildlife.org. Our Gmail account is on there. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to us there. We're also on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and we have Twitter that has a lot of our videos. All of these online sessions that we've had have been recorded and are also on YouTube, so you can always go back and re-watch them if you would like. One of the things I would like to ask some of you that are on this call is, if you have some topics that you would like us to have more of these webinars on, please email them to us. We're always open to new suggestions. Oops. So our mission, you can see here, it's to create, protect, preserve wildlife habitat through education, engagement, and enjoyment. So tonight's one of the education pieces. We hope you enjoy it, and we hope that leads you to wanting to become more engaged in some of the activities that we do. This is a picture from Chantilly Ecological Sanctuary, which we certified as a wildlife habitat and also partner with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater and do projects out there. So we have several of those in progress right now. So one of the ways that we are able to do the projects that we do are with volunteers. We can't do it without volunteers. Our board and our officers are all volunteers. We also have people that have agreed to be like on a volunteer pool. And if you'd like to do that, you can send us your name and phone number through email. There's no obligation for it. It's just when we have an event coming up and you're interested in it and you're available, you can join us. And if it's not something you want to do, that's fine too. Which leads me into our next really cool volunteer event. We're pairing it with our I Spy Nature Walk. So we usually, the I Spy is usually a nature walk where we go to a nearby park or nature preserve and we explore out there. Well, March 19th through the 26th is Stormwater's Creek Week, where they have a lot of creek cleanup events. So we have paired with them. And the reason that this kind of works is because protecting habitat is part of our mission, and this is one of the ways we protect it. So we'll be doing a trash cleanup along Briar Creek in the Chantilly Ecological Sanctuary. Stormwater will provide all of our supplies, the trash pickers, trash bags, gloves. I've even requested some waders in case anybody's brave and wants to actually get into the creek in March. But anyway, so we do have this as a sign up genius, and I put the link there. We can go ahead and put that in the chat box too, or you can go to our Facebook page. It'll shortly be up on our Instagram account, and you can sign up through there. We would love to have you come out. It's a great family event too. It's a great way to get the kids involved and get them aware of trash being a problem in the environment, and we'll keep it from getting all the way to the ocean. So if you are in Charlotte and you're not currently a member of Charlotte Wildlife Stewards, we encourage you to join us. You would do that through the North Carolina Wildlife Federation website. And if you are a member, make sure that your membership is current, and if it's expired, go ahead and renew that today. We do get a portion of your membership fee. It's $25 for a year. So for new members, we get half of that, and that helps us in carrying out our mission because we run totally on donations. So we thank you for that. So we have some upcoming programs. We do them January through May and September through November. So for the rest of this year, I'm real excited about our March program, which is going to be on frogs. I love those little guys. This is a picture of a pickerel frog. And we have, I think Alvin told me we have 30 native species of frogs just in North Carolina, so you can imagine how many species there are worldwide. And then in April, Lisa Tompkins will be giving us guidance on shade gardening. So there are plenty of native plants that love the shade. And, we know they're all the sun loving, but she's going to help us with knowing what we can put in our shade gardens. And that program may be a virtual program with also in person. We'll let you know about that. We're going to figure that out. The program in May is going to be an in-person program because Carolina Headwaters is going to actually bring some of their snake ambassadors with them. They do have a scarlet king snake that's very friendly. I've met it, and anyway, I think it's always fun to meet these reptiles and put to rest some of the myths about them. So I hope that you'll be joining us for those programs as well. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to introduce Becky Skiba of the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. She's going to be speaking to us about the endangered and threatened wildlife that's in North Carolina. But even in this day and age, we're still having a problem with this. So Alden, I'd like you to go ahead and introduce Becky.
Excellent. Thank you, Donna. And I just want to take a minute and thank all of y'all for being here. We're nearing 30 people here for this seminar, so that is awesome. Thank you guys for coming. It's my honor to introduce our speaker tonight. I've had the pleasure of attending several workshops and training with Rebecca. She goes by Becky Skiba, and I think most of them have been virtual. I'm not sure if we've ever actually met in person. I feel like we did back when I was on the coast, but her resume is very impressive. She is one of the most knowledgeable environmental educators that I've had the pleasure to learn from and to work with. We're excited to have her. She wanted to be here in person. We wanted to be here in person, but with these waves of COVID and how everything's going, it's just going to be, it's virtual. So y'all probably read her description. We know that Becky attended the University of Georgia. Go Bulldogs. She received her BS in ecology, and she participated in sea turtle research down there for the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. And she worked down there on Little Cumberland Island, and then moved across the way to Jekyll Island, where she worked for the 4-H Center, doing a lot of environmental education with kindergartners through adults, teaching coastal ecology, herpetology, fish dissections, botany, birding. I mean, the list goes on and on. Becky has a lot of knowledge. So she moved to Savannah after a year and worked as the program director for a nonprofit. The program director for a nonprofit called Wilderness Southeast, and she led groups on private tours of barrier islands by boat and on foot, marsh and maritime forest tours. Those are some tough tours there through the mud, birding. And she also worked with Title I middle schoolers on coastal ecology program called Fish Gotta Swim. Becky's also volunteered with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to do sea turtle work on Blackbeard Island and wood stork studies at Harris Neck National Wildlife Refuge. After being hired on for 6 months, she went on to manage volunteers for the Sea Turtle Project and continue wood stork studies. In 2014, she moved to Mississippi to work for the Audubon as their education manager in the aftermath of the BP oil spill, and funding disbursements for reevaluating the damage to bird species, as well as to help establish a baseline of the current coastal population. And she came to her most recent job to work for the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission in 2015 as the Coastal Regional Education Specialist. I'm telling you, she's really, really good at her job. She teaches wildlife and trainer curriculum-based programming like Project Wild and Project Wet, some stuff like that. Maybe some of y'all have participated in for non-formal educators in the public in 34 counties. So we're so happy to have Becky here. And I will just turn it over to her, and you guys enjoy the presentation. All right, Becky, it's all you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alden, and thanks everybody for having me. I truly do appreciate it. I will tell you, I tend to talk really fast. I get really, really excited about this, and I know my accent is thick, so I'll just acknowledge that now. Having said that, don't be shy. If I am moving too fast, or you have another comment, feel free to drop that in the chat. I know that my friends, the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards, are going to monitor that. my plan is to stop. I'm going to try to get through 6 species, but I want to caution that I could spend an hour on each one. There's just so much to know about them. So I really tried to cut it down, but it's still going to be really hard for me to get this all done in time. Thank goodness there's a recording, but I'm going to stop after every animal and open it up for questions for about 5 minutes. You know, and then if you have any lingering questions after that, or we don't get to all of them, we'll definitely visit them at the end there. So can everybody see this PowerPoint okay?
Yeah, Becky, let me just chime in. You have till 8:30.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me get something around me to click for time. Okay. Okay. And you know, this is highly informal, so if you need to stop and use the restroom or anything like that, feel free. But if you would prefer my friends to take a more structured break, just let me know. But hopefully I'll keep it interesting enough to where you'll be on the edge of your seats, but we'll try. So as you can tell, this is just a very small sample of species that I've selected throughout the state of North Carolina of wildlife species that are struggling. And I did put wildlife in peril because there's a reason, and we're going to find out why these species are actually struggling in our state and what management efforts the Wildlife Resource Commission and other partnering agencies are taking to make sure that these species are around for future generations. So first of all, I kind of want to establish that baseline understanding of what endangered and threatened status actually means. So the short and dirty is that an endangered species is something, it's a species that's on the brink of extinction right now, meaning in our lifetimes, we could see this species be obliterated. And it's unfortunate because, you know, we're kind of in a mass extinction event. So, you know, this is something we actually do witness. We just may not be as knowledgeable about it because, you know, some of these species probably within our lifetimes had maintained such low populations that we weren't aware of their presence. So that in and of itself is a small crime to me. And then threatened species are those that are likely to be on the brink of extinction in the near future. So, you know, this has to do with a significant portion of their range. And, you know, it does have to do with the timeline. What can we do in a short span of time in the long-term management of this species to ensure its success? Is it viable? Is it plausible? Will it actually happen? You know, and so all of this starts from the Federal Endangered Species Act of 1973, and that's where these two categories essentially come from, describing, you know, the types, the declining species of plants and animals, and then the protections that this act affords. Now, all of the protections of the Endangered Species Act are provided to endangered species. However, many, but not all of those same protections are also available to threatened species. So that's why there's a very strict distinction between endangered and threatened. And I know that depending on where you get your information, some of these, if it's outdated online or in print, some of these designations may have even changed, either, you know, from threatened to endangered, or sometimes in a very, you know, nice turn of events, or when management techniques actually succeed, from endangered to threatened. So that is something to just kind of double and triple check, just depending on what's out there. So, and of course, these designations are from, you know, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they have the authority to determine when those protections should apply to each threatened species. And then, you know, they're the ones that also reevaluate and see when we need to change status. So, having said that, let's talk about some of the major contributors to decline. Some of you may have some pretty good guesses, but just in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and start off with, and granted, it depends on the species, but these are the 3 overriding factors that seem to affect species across the board. So the first one, I'm going to throw that dirty laundry out there, climate change. Okay. Climate change affects many parts of an animal's life. So that comes from the timing of insects and fruits emerging for newborn and young animals to feed on, to increased inclement weather events, or the increased you know, frequency of those. That makes it challenging to survive. And overall change in habitat and life requirements. So, you know, this could include loss of you know, very important grounds that are used for breeding or feeding. So overall change in what is available for them to use. And of course, with inclement weather, we have things like drought, we have things like massive flooding, and these things have happened throughout time, which we'll see in a couple of species. You know, as you know, our coastline actually used to be much further out into the ocean, as we have fossil evidence to prove. but we're talking about something that's happening on an unprecedented scale. So something that can be seen from one generation to the next, whereas before it was separated out by a very long period of time. So the other thing, believe it or not, managing wildlife and protecting wildlife, I'd say just working with the state, about 98% of my job with education is actually education dealing with public perception and clearing out myths and misinformation that's been spread and a lot of fear mongering. And I see it all the time, you know, the news, the media will run a story about coyotes or something else, and it's the underlying current is fear, and it's just very slanted, and it's really hard for me to watch stuff like that now because, you know, they're going for that for the ratings. But truly managing wildlife actually begins with managing people and their perceptions. And I'm not just talking about people that are moving here from other states, you know, coming here for retirement, but also locals. So, you know, a lot of this information gets passed down through some of our locals that have been here generation after generation, and it's just kind of like a habit. So things like shooting rattlesnakes, well, we do it all the time. That's not always the best excuse for why we should, you know, continue to do something, or maybe we should consider changing actions. So, you know, as we begin to educate about each species, hopefully we can also increase the transparency of our conservation projects and detail how they intend to help our species recover, and also the public's role in all of that. So I know that a lot of times these projects seem so far out, like they're intangible, somebody else is doing them, but there's actions that you can take every day, even if it's just educating yourself, to really help this species in the long haul. So just keep that in mind. You're not you're a contributor to the solution, even if you're not carrying around a biology degree. So, and then you might guess the #1 reason for decline in species: habitat loss and degradation. So it's the single largest cause of species decline. Land is typically converted into agricultural farms and development, roadways, major interstate systems, and other uses that aren't really supportive of an animal's needs. And these changes in landscapes are going to impact the amount of land that's not only available for use, but also the connectivity of these spaces. So, you know, we think about, especially during the pandemic, you're very aware of the square footage in your homes. You have, say, each one of your life needs between going to the bathroom, the kitchen, the bedroom, the living room. You're going there to fulfill different needs or desires. But unlike animals, they need a larger range typically, because they have to also allow for different weather, right? So different seasons, different food availability, mate availability, right? So a lot of times they need connectivity and habitats, what we like to term corridors, and that's something that we have taken for granted. But when you know, see, like, look at Central Park, right? Everybody's like, oh, it's the biggest green space, and then all around it is city. So they're literally, the walls are closing in, and that may not be enough space. Some animals you may still find there. Like, I'm in a neighborhood where everybody gets one tree, unfortunately. But that comes with a mockingbird. I don't really get much more diversity than that. So, you know, you start to think about how that also not only affects, you know, your species diversity, but your richness as well. And this is something that, until we look at our response to how we develop and what we allow and what we make space for, this is an issue that hopefully a lot of city councils and a lot of planning committees are taking into account. And we have the Green Growth Toolbox at Wildlife Resource Commission, where we actually sit down and we work with those cities and those towns and those developers to try to find solutions to make cities or certain areas more wildlife friendly. And that doesn't include just a little green space with a picnic table and a tree, right? So those are some of the major contributors to decline. We also have a protected wildlife species PDF in North Carolina, and I believe, Alden, I think I emailed that to you just now, but if I did not, remind me and I can send that. But the way that,
I got it. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to be thorough. But so as a state agency, North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission is the state agency that is charged with the incredible and awesome responsibility of trying to preserve and conserve our native and also non-native species that are here in North Carolina for future generations. However, according to federal listing, we also have state listing requirements for us to be able to prioritize our direct conservation management. So a way we do that is with the Wildlife Action Plan, and this is another way that we also have basically a handbook to address human expansion across North Carolina. And we do that by figuring out where these priority species live and exist and how we can acquire that land while it's still available, right? So land is a finite resource, so we know for a fact you have to preserve or conserve that habitat because, as you know, we're a state agency, so we do public lands. So it's not trying to be an elitist thing. We have game lands and things like that that are open to the public for use, but we want to make sure that we do keep that land open for those animals, right? So in total, the Wildlife Resource Commission owns over 2 million acres of land, and we directly manage 500,000 of those acres. The other 1.5 million are managed in conjunction with various conservation partners, a number that we hope to see increase in the future. And, again, that's put into the Game Lands program, and also where we can afford the public opportunities to have wildlife associated recreation, but also just, again, to set some land aside for future plans of management for these species. So that's one of the major ecosystems I know that's a priority for us are longleaf pine ecosystems, and that also requires periodic fires to maintain its health. And we're going to learn some species that actually truly benefit from that. So what are some of the species, just to give you an idea, because this kind of blows me away, and it's okay if you can't read every single species on here. This is one that is going to be included in that email and that PDF. But if we're talking about state listed species, okay, basically that's for us to manage. So endangered, again, means in this lifetime or very soon within its range and all or parts of its range, it's going to become extinct if we don't take management efforts. So that includes 4 species of amphibians, 8 species of birds, 2 crustacea, 12 fish, 6 mammals, 24 mollusks, and 6 reptiles that are in that category. So, I mean, it just, for me, this is just spellbinding to see it laid out like this, just to really kind of understand. Now, our threatened species, these are ones that in the near future are likely going to fall, into that same category of a risk of losing or significant decline of a species. That's 7 amphibians, 8 birds, 5 crustacea, 14 other fish, 4 mammals, 18 mollusks, and 6 reptiles. So this is just kind of a good way to keep tabs on what's the priority species, what do we need to put the greatest emphasis on protecting, and then, of course, this isn't exclusive. So if I just want to protect the eastern tiger salamander, luckily it's a nice web of interactions and biodiversity. So even if I take endeavors to protect that species, others will benefit in kind. So. And then we have what's called the state special concern. And basically, this just means these species have been found to be the most vulnerable to habitat loss. So that is why they're of priority, okay? And that includes 13 species of amphibians, 19 of birds, and then you can see on the left-hand side larger numbers for the others there. So the first animal that I kind of want to start off with today is the red cockaded woodpecker. And I try to choose some animals. Some are local to specific regions and some are kind of span over Charlotte a little bit too. But our red cockaded woodpecker is state listed as endangered, okay? And the term cockaded, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that, but it was used in the early 1800s to refer to a ribbon or another ornament worn on a hat. So here it actually refers to that jaunty little head feather back there. You see the red right back behind his eye. And only the red cockaded woodpecker has that nice bright white cheek patch like that. So the presence of red cockaded woodpeckers also indicates a very healthy southern pine ecosystem of longleaf pines, and they're known for having very little understory, right? And that's typically because of natural burns. These forests, these pines are evolved and adapted to deal with fire. That's why the bark is like little sheets of paper. If you get up close to it, when it burns, it curls away and flies away. So red cockaded woodpeckers and pines have actually co-evolved in this fire-dominated system. So that's why they prefer to live in live pines for nest creation. And so they're kind of picky. Again, they're habitat specialists. They really prefer longleaf pines, but they prefer the older ones, right? So 80 to 120-year-old living pines. Red cockaded woodpeckers are also primary cavity nesters, which, as you might have heard before, this is the only woodpecker species that we have that will actually dig a cavity or drill out a cavity in a live tree. So they try to target trees that have a little bit of rot going on, so that makes it a little easier, but it can take them sometimes 2+ years to actually drill out a cavity that's livable and something that they can actually occupy for the nest. So we'll get into how they get a little bit of help with that too. But because they're what we call a primary cavity nester, the first one to kind of etch that cavity out, they're also deemed a keystone species. 99% of this species has been in decline since the Europeans. So again, very worthy of that endangered species status. Today, there's about 5,600 groups of red cockaded woodpeckers, or 14,000 birds that actually remain. So, and woodpeckers, fun fact about those, they actually have forked tongues and they're kind of like hairy. If you've never seen a picture of a woodpecker tongue, Google it. It's both exciting and kind of disgusting, but it's how they're able to kind of creep in there and pull those insects out. So, but if you're thinking about a red cockaded woodpecker and its range, they are non-migratory woodpeckers, so they're also very territorial. I'm not sure if any of you have been through the game lands or other protected areas of land and you see a pine tree with a white ring painted around it. Those are trees that have been marked for having an active nest or an active cavity with red cockaded woodpeckers. So here in this map, you see kind of the range of where they have been found, right? And then if we were to zoom in on North Carolina, this is the range where they historically have been found. But, you know, currently, again, due to major habitat loss, this is something that constantly needs to be amended. So especially when it comes to birds, and especially in response to climate changes, never take a range map for granted, because that stuff literally changes. It could change per year. So it just depends on what's going on, because, and that's especially with migratory species, but with a species like this, with a longleaf pine ecosystem that is in sharp decline, you know, those numbers are pretty, they drop pretty quickly. So what are we doing to manage our red cockaded woodpeckers? There's a program called the Safe Harbor Program that I'll get into in a moment. That's one of our partners with the Fish and Wildlife Service. But I want to talk a little bit about what makes this little guy on the left, or sorry about my coworker. He's very rude. He's a golden retriever and he has no mute button. So red cockaded woodpeckers actually have a very unique and rare social system. So they have breeding pairs and they live together with anywhere between 0 to 4 of the male offspring from the previous year's clutch. And those young men work as helpers for the new offspring. So they help kind of parent, help kind of raise those chicks, which is actually really cool. This is called cooperative breeding. So it's pretty unique behavior. Groups need 75 to 200 acres for foraging. So if you think about it, it's not like a woodpecker is just going to work on one tree their whole life. So in order to have that much space, obviously we got to really monitor and survey where these red cockaded woodpeckers are, so that we make sure we set enough territory or enough space aside for them. So red cockaded woodpeckers have also adapted to food scarcity. So I don't know if you've ever heard this or not, but the males will actually forage on the limbs and the upper trunk of the tree, and the females forage on the trunk below the crown. This way, they have their own zones, and so this will also help you if you're looking for a male or female red cockaded woodpecker and you see them foraging. But they do that in a way where they don't outcompete themselves. So I thought that was also very compassionate. But the artificial nest boxes, as you can see, this bird has landed on one, and you might be able to see it's a vertical rectangular shape with a very clear PVC pipe opening there. But what biologists do is they basically try to, again, it takes these nests like 2 years to get drilled in. In that meantime, you could have high mortality amongst these birds. So what you really want to do is you want to kind of help cut down on that time so that you can actually speed up the breeding process and protect them at the same time. And so the artificial nest boxes are inserted in there by wildlife biologists, and then they try to kind of, reincorporate the sap or make it look as natural as possible so that it doesn't seem fishy to the birds and they'll actually start using them. Now you see the lady on the far right, she's holding one of those boxes. Inside, you're talking about, it's about as narrow in space as a shoebox. And I'm not talking for hiking boots. I'm talking about like for tennis shoes, right? So, or ladies, a box of high heels. So it's a very small place in there, but you got to think about it. They're literally in there just to kind of cuddle up, and then they spend most of their time outside of the nest except for when they're resting or breeding or sitting on eggs, right? So the females will actually lay about 3 to 5 eggs in mid-April, and those hatch in 10 to 12 days. That is the shortest incubation period of bird species right there. Nestlings will actually fledge, meaning leave the nest in 24 to 27 days, and they're born without feathers and with their eyes shut. So you're talking about, within a month, they go from being blind and helpless with no feathers to pretty decently self-sufficient, although they do actually hang around for 6 months to continue to be fed by the adults, but it's still not a bad deal. And then eventually, after that, after 6 months, they'll disperse and from their hatching territory to find something that's new for them. So the Safe Harbor program is a Fish and Wildlife Service initiative that the Wildlife Resource Commission partners with, and it introduces and monitors these woodpecker populations and breeding. So we try to also focus on maintaining and enhancing habitat in North Carolina through a voluntary land management commitment by landowners. So biologists will also use this opportunity to check nests or drill in those boxes, or in the far right corner to band birds. And they're also doing a swab on this bird. They do check for diseases or anything else like that. So, we ban the birds as well, because if we recite them, a lot of times we can actually, tell some useful information. So we get to learn about age distribution throughout the population, their territories where they're hanging out after they've fledged, as well as lifespan. So they conduct several surveys throughout the year in order to monitor these birds. So before we move on to the Gopher Frog, do we have any questions that anybody would like to? I don't know how you want to shoot that over.
So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box if you have access there, or you can click the raise hand feature and we'll call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question. But if there aren't any questions now, we can keep going and circle back. Okay, I see a few folks. John, would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah, just wanted to, as far as a red cockaded woodpecker, my understanding was that, there was a healthy population, at Fort Bragg. Is that accurate?
So yeah, actually one of the things that we're noticing, and I'm going to get into it with the diamondback rattlesnake as well, our largest plots of a contiguous longleaf pine forest are actually on military bases and military installations. And that's just because, as you know, Department of Defense, they use that land for training drills and things like that. And so luckily the military actually cooperates with us on several conservation projects. And because they have a lot of that land left intact, that is where we have some of our larger concentrations of our red cockaded woodpeckers. The next, I guess, the follow-up to that would be our game lands. So like Holly Shelter Game Lands and several others also have some, some red cockaded woodpeckers. But honestly, that gets back to that range. The greater amount of space and resources and habitat they have, the more successful that they're going to be.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Alden, I see you've got your hand raised.
Hey, Becky, just wanted to connect this to Charlotte a little bit. So where would you say the closest population of red cockaded woodpeckers is to Charlotte, and what is the exact extent of the historical range of the longleaf pine? Like, if you could, give us a county reference.
So the entire southeast, like all the way down the whole swath of the southeast, used to be longleaf pine, and we've lost. And I have the figure in here somewhere, but you know, at least like I think 97% of our longleaf pine ecosystem throughout that entire stretch. As far as the closest one to Charlotte, I would have to reacquaint myself with the game lands, because I know with the current range, you do have some populations that are over in that area. I just don't know specifics on exactly where they are. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. I probably should have looked that up before getting started today. But if you have any game lands that are out there that you see the white ring, or even, you know, some other lands by the Nature Conservancy or other conservation with that white ring, typically that is the presence of red cockaded woodpeckers. Activity is current, and also through that safe harbor program, you know, we ask private landowners to actually help out, and they get like a tax break. And they also kind of loosen up some of the restrictions of the Endangered Species Act as well. So that's a voluntary program that they can join, and I can provide more information on that later too. But it also, you know, because I know they get concerned, well, what if the red cockaded woodpeckers take over my land and I can't sell my house? So they kind of relax some of the restrictions on that, just because, you know, they know that a landowner is doing their best to kind of help set aside that property. But that can become kind of controversial and difficult when you have developers looking at a piece of land for a new development, and they find, so we come in and do surveys just to make sure that it's not a viable red cockaded woodpecker population there.
And I will just say, if you go east on 74, it's only a county or two over where you start to see longleaf pine from Charlotte. Richmond County, Rockingham area, and then Weymouth Woods isn't far. It's worth a drive, and they do have a population over there. So just for the Charlotte folks, if you guys want to get in there.
Yeah, thank you, Alda.
Awesome. And I see, Donna, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I would just want to throw out, there's this great book written by a woman named Janice Ray. It's called Ecology of a Cracker Childhood. Beck, yes. You've read that? I mean, I love that book. It's kind of a memoir. It's like each chapter is like a memoir about her growing up, but also then the next chapter would be about the longleaf pine and the history of it. And she goes into all this detail about the longleaf pines and what lives there and why it survives fire and why it needs fire. And if you're interested in learning more about the longleaf pine and the history of it, I highly recommend that Ecology of a Cracker Childhood.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Donna. Does anyone have any more pending questions on the red cockaded woodpecker before we move on? Alrighty, I think we can go ahead and go forward. If anyone has any pending questions, feel free to type those in the chat. We can address them later on.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So another fun creature here that unfortunately is on the state listed as endangered is the Carolina Gopher Frog. So this is one, as you can see, such a looker. It is a medium-sized frog. I know this picture makes it look ginormous, but it is fairly large. And I know we call it a frog, and so there's that whole idea of, well, it looks more like a toad because it has warty skin and a fat head and chunky body, and you know, but that would be a whole nother class to differentiate between frogs and toads. But basically, what you know about frogs and what you know about toads, just throw it out the window, because toads can have smooth skins, you know, frogs can have warty skins. There's so much variation in color and things like that. So really, it's just better to kind of learn the species that are there. And it's also a lot of fun to learn the frog calls and toad calls. Don't exclude those guys. But so these are called gopher frogs. Now, I'm from Georgia originally, and so, you know, in certain parts of Georgia, we had gopher tortoises. So they would dig these nice deep burrows and live in there. And so, you know, in North Carolina, we don't have gopher tortoises. They're not this far up. And so the adults for the gopher frogs actually spend most of their life underground in burrows. And, you know, that is not uncommon amongst frogs and toads. Like the spadefoot toad will live a big chunk of its life underground and only come up for breeding, like usually right when there's a big rainfall, they'll pop up. But the gopher frog actually prefers to breed in fishless ponds. And so that's kind of difficult to find, because I know, with ephemeral wetlands, that's something that's easier to find because, you have a drought and those things dry up, and then these adult frogs can actually go and burrow up and be just fine. But you want something that's not going to eat your tadpoles, right, for the greatest success. So some of our larger, more established ponds tend to have fish. Either they've been put there naturally, they've been stocked, there's been birds that have been feeding and stepped in eggs and transported them to the next one. There's all kinds of ways. But really, if you see fish in a pond, odds are extremely small that you're going to find any kind of gopher frogs or tadpoles there. But this is another creature that also depends on longleaf pine habitats as well as savannas. And this is a creature that you'll see breeding February through April. So I only bring that up because if you're out walking, say you're around a game land or you're in a certain area and you're listening outside to wildlife calls and just different sounds and stuff, you may hear our gopher frog calling out. If you do, it's quite the treat. Again, it'd be pretty rare, but if you do, definitely let us know, because we're always excited to learn about new places where they are. So the egg masses that they lay are actually super, just thick and globular, and just they actually look to have some kind of a herbaceous submerged aquatic, vegetation, or some kind of a herbaceous base, because they stick those eggs to the stem of something that's underneath the water. And again, with an ephemeral pond, if you get a foot of water that stays there, for a couple months, that's pretty good. But usually, they're kind of in those lower lying areas there. So again, the reason that the longleaf pine ecosystem, it's considered critically endangered because its whole area from its historical range has actually been reduced by more than 98%. So that's 1% off on that. But the gopher frog actually requires both appropriate breeding ponds and upland terrestrial habitat to actually burrow. And that's something that the longleaf pine ecosystem can actually support. Also, you don't have a big understory in longleaf pine habitats, which is another plus. So, the ponds typically are relatively open canopy, which also can contribute to the ephemeral nature, right? So if you get the sun beating down on you, it's going to evaporate quicker, less likely to have deeper pits and things like that, because you don't have as many deeply rooted shrubs and plants and things all around it. So the tadpoles of these actually closely resemble those of a southern leopard frog, and they actually will transform in about 12 weeks. So that's pretty cool. So I'm going to give you one last look at this handsome fella. So if you're curious where the gopher frog is actually found, so in here you're going to want to look at the key. Purple is where it has been confirmed presence. So we have noticed it there before. And then predicted presence is the peach kind of areas in there. These are areas where the habitat is right. It seems to be, kind of still within that range that we should find it, because it meets all of its life requirements. We've got that sandhills, southeastern coastal plain with the longleaf pine ecosystems. You've got the right elevation, you've got the right mix there. So this is kind of what we're working with now, but this is also where doing frog surveys and things like that are going to help us out. But there's another project that is actually helping us update this map rather frequently and study it. So, and we can't do it alone. The Wildlife Resource Commission has to have partners. So what are we doing? You might have heard of the Gopher Frog. It's like a Head Start program. So first of all, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is actually evaluating the need to list the gopher frog under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So I just want to clarify that in North Carolina, this species actually exists in pretty low numbers across the southern plain. And known populations have actually suffered major losses that are likely not recoverable. So those are in specific areas of that range. So again, I'm going to go back to the map where you see those peach areas. So those are probably areas where we thought they either could be or where they might have been, but we just can't find them there anymore. And so what do we mean by that? So only 7 of the historical 23 populations remain. That's a 70% reduction. So only 14 of the original 53 pond sites are still active, and egg mass data actually suggests that the total population of gopher frogs in North Carolina is only 200 to 300 individuals. So part of the problem is that these populations are actually fragmented and they face a lot of threats like disease, severe weather. So those long periods of drought are going to keep them from breeding. So they're not going to have just a fishless pond. They're not going to have any pond, right? And then also development, right? That's the number one, just kind of really just cuts down what's there, what's available, but it also increases sedimentation in different areas. It changes the types of plants that grow and succeed. So that changes the overall habitat, even just changing the predator-prey dynamic that's there, when you develop and disturb an area. So all of that is due to just kind of lack of proper management. So to maintain the gopher frog in North Carolina, the Wildlife Resource Commission, we are trying to augment populations where it's possible. So through this head starting effort, we're trying to create additional breeding habitats. We're working with partners to establish goals for each individual population that we're introducing. And we're determining the best management practices for wetland and upland restoration and management. Because again, you can do everything you want breeding them in captivity, but if you don't have an actual place in the wild to release them for them to be self-sustaining, it's kind of all for naught. So this includes, using the application of prescribed fire, again, managing proper management of that habitat. So we're also going to pursue land acquisition and other conservation practices in areas where we know the gopher frog exists, kind of the whole if you build it, they will come philosophy. But also we want to acquire lands where we're going to find appropriate habitat that we can restore, manage, or, kind of create new population, create hospitable areas where those new populations can be introduced or reintroduced. So and in addition to that, so you'll see up here on the slide, in 2011, we started working with North Carolina Aquarium at Fort Fisher, and then again in 2015 with the zoo. And we were actually collecting gopher frog egg masses found in the wild, because basically these lands, it's the legal system to purchase land and to have acquisition and all of this stuff. It takes time, and these animals don't have that time. Again, this is this is endangered. It's risk of being gone immediately. So they collected all these egg masses and they said, well, I'm going to try to breed them in captivity. We're going to try to have successful, and maybe, I'm sorry about that, maybe we can reintroduce them, right? So when the eggs hatched out, they raised up the tadpoles and they put them in outdoor tanks. They're trying to simulate that environment, so that they're not used to, being hand fed, used to people. We want to, again, keep them as wild as possible. And so then we actually took those same frogs, and then once we had the land acquisition or found good areas for them, released them back to those same locations where they were actually collected. So, I know there's a lot of research behind, just knowing your home range, that kind of natal association of where you are. So these are called Head Start efforts. So basically we took them out of the wild from their most vulnerable stage to try to protect them and also protect them from losing habitat, and then reintroduce them at, an age and a size where hopefully they'll be more protected and able to survive and deal with any of the harshies that exist out there. So again, we're trying to constantly look for new habitats. So if you've ever been out on game lands or other areas, you might know of some things that are called borrow pits, where, either people were building up roads or they dug out certain areas. And so a lot of ponds kind of get their start from those borrow pits. And so a lot of times we try to either recreate or see if we can't use some of those if they're in the ideal habitat to have fishless ponds for future releases of tadpoles, and also maybe to get a gopher frog population established through that. And another thing, if your eyes aren't spinning yet, the commission is actually doing genetic analyses of gopher frog populations. And so we may work to establish connectivity and gene flow between existing populations, potentially through translocation. So that's a whole nother kind of take on what we're doing, but just trying to ensure the integrity of it, but learning as much of it as we can. And there is a gopher frog conservation plan that you can find on our website fairly easily, and actually go over this process and what they're doing in detail and the goals that are therein. So you're probably thinking, okay, well, that's all well and good, but that's very much a biologist driven initiative. So what can I do? So partnering with NC Park, which is our partners in amphibian and reptile conservation, there's a really cool thing that you can do for citizen science, or I think what's trending now is called community science, right? So calling amphibian survey program CAST. So it consists of 141 road-based listening routes, and they're randomly placed throughout the state of North Carolina. And that randomness is to kind of, you know, back up the science, the integrity of the science collection. So each route is going to have about 10 listening stops according to available amphibian breeding areas. So they're going to be close to wetlands, ponds, streams, little bodies or patches of water where you would expect to find amphibians collecting and breeding, right? So I know when we're walking or we're outside and we hear the frogs and the toads, we think, wow, isn't this beautiful? They're just basically screaming out, I'm single, right? So, you know, some of them are ahead of Valentine's Day with our spring peepers starting off strong, and then others, you know, wait for those warmer months to really just declare their needs. So the routes will vary in length, but volunteers can essentially adopt these routes and then drive it at least once during each sampling window, and they can stop and listen and document the calls. So you have to learn to differentiate the calls of different frog and toad species. So that's where the fun and the challenge lies there. So there's more information if you really want to get into the nitty gritty about what those contain. But basically, what that does is it helps us get an idea of abundance of species and kind of where they're occurring. So the CASP survey data actually contributes to information on the distribution and relative abundance of frogs and toads in North Carolina over time. Because we run the same routes, it's really important to see, hey, we used to hear pickerel frogs on this route. I'm not hearing them anymore. I haven't heard them for 5 years, right? So that kind of tells us, hey, something's changing. What are we missing? What do we need to look back at and figure out how to manage better, right? So, you know, that data gets pulled with other data from other states, like North Carolina and other states, and then it gives us an analysis for regional and national trends of frog distributions and changes in frog populations. So maybe it's a bigger picture thing, right? So if we understand those trends, we'll get a better understanding of the status and health of our frog and toad populations, and then that'll help us, you know, protect those critical habitats for those frog and toad species. So another way, if you're out walking and hiking around and stuff and you see, you know, egg masses that are deposited, or even tadpoles, observing those. So, you know, even making reference or, you know, checking those different species out that way, that's also of interest to us as well. So, I mean, you know, obviously eggs are usually, they hatch within a couple weeks of being deposited. So, you know, there's a fairly short window to watch a body of water or an area to see what's emerging. And so that information is just kind of fun to do on a very local level, but that is also something that provided to biologists can prove to be useful, because we only have so many biologists and we have so many more residents that can provide that kind of help. I am so sorry. I don't know what his deal is. So if you're thinking about, well, is there a route near me? So here are the active routes that are going on right now. And I know there's a color key there. Piedmont area, you're looking for the green or the red, sorry, coastal, the greens and mountains, of course, the blues in there. And you can sign up and see what's available. And you can see the little frog down there that's actually doing the calling right now. So, any questions on gopher frogs? There's still very little, we're still learning so much about our gopher frogs, and this is a species that we're really trying to dive in and just kind of get resituated in their habitat. But again, this is one that I may not be an expert on, but I'll do my best to answer your questions.
Hi, thanks. I think we have one question from John.
Yeah, Rebecca, are you, have these frogs or other amphibians in North Carolina been impacted by that fungus, which is impacting a lot of amphibians in other parts of the world?
Oh, the chytrid stuff?
Yeah.
So potentially they could be, and I think that was kind of thrown under the umbrella of disease, but it is definitely a concern. I don't know if they have noticed it and specifically in the gopher frogs, since because they've been basically hand rearing them and then introducing them, and then observing those ponds and kind of doing, you know, counts and stuff like that, and trying to observe if they're seeing tadpoles appear when they put adults in. They're hoping to have successful reproduction. So I don't know if they've noticed it in gopher frogs, but I know it is definitely a concern in other frog populations.
All right, thanks.
Uh-huh.
I see Crystal has their hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
This isn't really a question per se, more so a statement. And I know all the biology people are probably aware of it, but if you're not involved or have any sort of interest, watch the current goings on about Waters of the U.S. rulings where it pertains for these ephemeral upland ponds and stuff. It's very important as they no longer have a jurisdiction in most cases and will continue to be decimated. So hopefully that can improve and hopefully protect some of those areas federally and on a state level without having to be actually purchased in order to do so.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I know that when people hear ephemeral, they don't even know what that is half the time, but then sometimes, you know, they don't realize just how valuable that that habitat is to so many animals.
Awesome. I don't see any more questions, so we can go ahead and move forward. It's about 8 o'clock.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna try to do my best here. So the red wolf, this is one that the NC Wildlife Resource Commission, the state agency, does not manage. It's pretty much a federal initiative, but it has been one. I'm in the coast, and so I've heard a lot of talk about them. I know visiting Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge and other areas around, you know, the Albemarle Peninsula, I know that folks have taken more notice of the red wolves and they're becoming more and more interested. So I know that the #1 threat for our red wolves, besides habitat loss, and is definitely a negative public perception. So hopefully we can kind of clear a little bit of that up. But just know I'm not the foremost authority on the red wolf. I would definitely talked to some folks at the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. They do some work, and actually I got to work with some of them this weekend, and they were talking about how they're rearing pups and they're hopefully you know, getting ready to release them at some point. So that's pretty exciting, but they were pretty thrilled to talk about that part. So but just to kind of give you an update, as of October 2021, we had about 8 that were in the wild, and the one distinction of a red wolf between that and a coyote, because I do get this question a lot from hunters, seeing as they're very similar in size and appearance, and unless they're standing right next to each other, it's going to be really hard to discern one from the other. A red wolf is only slightly larger than a coyote, and we don't really have gray wolves to compare. So you know, our red wolves are going to have a collar on them, and that's because they are being reintroduced. So similar to the gopher frog, you know, they're rearing those pups in captivity and then releasing them into the wild, except for, you know, any pups that are born into the wild, in which case they're going to go out and try to anesthetize and tag them and put a collar on them so that they can also track them. And so the idea of having the collar on them is not only for distinguishing them between that and a coyote, but also to be able to, like I mentioned, track them, see where they're going, see what areas of habitat that they're most using or attracted to. Also, unfortunately, if that collar's not moving, that tracker's not moving, see the incidence of mortality that this creature has suffered. So so there's 8 known in the wild currently, but again, that number is going to increase. So there are some legal disputes and things that are in the works right now, but currently the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does have the green light to continue with the program as prescribed. So the total estimate in the wild, they said, was about 15 to 17, and I'm saying they as in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I know that there are at least 8 that we know. I think that they started off with 15 to 17, and then they had some mortality, a lot of which actually is motor vehicle incidents. So, and the species survival plan, what that basically talks about is how many they're trying to raise in captivity to produce and to release. So the red wolf is actually our most endangered wolf that we have. It was first listed as threatened with extinction under the Endangered Species Preservation Act of 1966 and in 1967. And of course, it is covered by the current Endangered Species Act of 73. So the red wolf actually used to be very common throughout eastern and south central United States, and the populations were decimated in the early 20th century as a result of intensive predator control programs and, you know, the degradation and alteration of species habitat. So, you know, most people in that particular portion of North Carolina, you know, very rural. People have livestock, people are farmers, people have, you know, just they weren't keen on having what they considered to be an apex predator roaming around and either costing them money or fear or you know, fear for mortality or anything like that. So, you know, most people just killed on sight without any regulation beforehand. So in 2016, the Fish and Wildlife Service actually made made it a priority to increase the size of the species survival plan, the population, the captive population, essentially, and it actually put a lot of money into it. So, and through fiscal year 2018, 2019, and 2020, it has put in over $771,000 through recovery challenge grants for the construction of additional red wolf enclosures. And again, that's for the breeding process as well. So they did in 2018 propose revising a rule to replace the existing regulations that was published in 1995, and that would govern the non-essential experimental population in eastern North Carolina. So in 2021, they withdrew this proposal. I'm not entirely sure 100% why, but basically what that says is that the red wolves in North Carolina are actually going to be managed under the existing regulations, and might even be clarified by, you know, court orders that are currently that have been okayed, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Now, of course, the legal proceedings may change that, but that takes some time. So basically what that says is under the 1995 rule that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has the authority to release additional wolves and conduct adaptive management accordingly. So the range is going to continue to encompass 5 counties in North Carolina. So Beaufort, Dare, Hyde, Tyrrell, and Washington counties. So if you want more information on that, of course, definitely visit the U.S. Fish and Wildlife page on that. But I just want to kind of talk a little bit about, I wanted to call home to the telemetry studies they're talking about. So in eastern North Carolina, the home range requirements for red wolf is about 20 to 80 square miles. So again, when you're thinking about habitat needs, there's a reason why the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service chose specific areas like national wildlife refuges to release and start this reintroduction program, because the land space available, but also the ability to kind of monitor it as well. So where did the red wolves historically occur? So they had a fairly large range, as you can see this kind of beige color that's spread throughout. And when we talk about a source population, these are the ones that are genetically true. So, you know, you see it in the, you know, on the Gulf there, and that's kind of what we're working with. There's been a lot of debate, I know, about genetic kind of is it pure? So the current populations, they're worried about you know, interbreeding with coyotes, which does occur if you have a red wolf that's looking for a mate in the right season. And again, with a 20 to 30 mile range, you know, I mean, the odds that you're going to be in, you know, basically in heat and finding a partner in that when your numbers are so low, sometimes, you know, it's like last call, you know, you look over, you're like, oh, that coyote will do, right? So, and then that happens. So, you know, that's another debate for, you know, the species protection and that sort of thing. Is it actually the species, or is this not genetically the same? So when we talk about the source population, that's the genetic, those are the ones that are true genetically. So the recovery of the red wolf actually began as a remarkable conservation success story. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service noticed that by 1972, the species was reduced to just this small coastal area in the southeast of Texas and southwest Louisiana. And so from 73 to 80, the service began trapping these wild wolves, and then they were trying to keep them from, you know, becoming extinct, but also establish that captive breeding program. So, and with the hopes of reintroducing into the wild. And basically, they established a captive breeding program, and they used 14 red wolves. And then after the numbers continued to decline due to, you know, human persecution, habitat loss, it was actually, the red wolf was declared extinct in the wild in 1980. And so in 84, this captive breeding program was actually approved by the AZA as the Red Wolf Species Survival Plan Program. And, you know, that's oversight for maintaining a healthy and genetically diverse stock under human care. So again, still some wolves like alive, but not in the wild at that time. And so recovery efforts in the wild began in northeastern North Carolina with the establishment of our North Carolina region, or the 5 counties, as I mentioned before. And so the idea was to release those red wolves from that captive breeding program on the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge in 1987. And so between 87 and 94, over 60 adult red wolves from that captive breeding program were actually released into the Alligator National Wildlife Refuge. And by the mid-90s, red wolves in the wild actually maintained territories, and they formed their packs, and they successfully bred in the wild. And in 2011, the reintroduction effort culminated in having 89 red wolves in 2012, an estimated population at one time as high as 120 red wolves within that 5-county range. So this is the first time a large carnivore had been declared extinct in the wild and then reintroduced into the United States. So some other kind of celebrated successes off of this was also, including pup fostering and coyote sterilizations. But so there's a lot of information on the amount and the numbers and things like that, but I'll just go ahead and skip to the very most recent number. So as of August 2021, there were approximately 241 red wolves in 45 different captive breeding programs or facilities across the country. And so in 2020 and 2021, during that breeding season, 30 breeding pairs were actually established, and 23 pups and 6 litters were born. So 4 of those adults were released into the wild, into North Carolina, and 4 pups were fostered to a wild red wolf. And so that basically just left 19 pups added to, we had 19 pups added to the captive breeding program. So they're hoping for an increase, and the breeding season increased actually up to 38 pairs. So that's pretty exciting when you think about that. Now let's look at the range in North Carolina, as I mentioned before. It's kind of in this particular corner up here. And so I know that they say approximately 100 red wolves roam their habitat. You're going to see some variation on numbers and things like this because it, again, updated sources, but the diet of our red wolves actually varies depending on available prey. So, like coyotes in a similar fashion, they can actually be, pretty variable in what they eat. So being more of a generalist is going to help them out, help them survive during harsh conditions. But normally they prefer a combination of white-tailed deer, raccoons, and smaller mammals like rabbits and nutria. Thank goodness something's eating those, right? And and rodents. So they're also an opportunistic feeder, and they can travel up to 20 miles a day or more to find food, which can actually be consumed at a rate of 2 to 5 pounds daily. So, I mean, they once they find it, they're definitely not dilly-dallying for sure. And so a lot of times people confuse the behaviors of coyotes and red wolves, but here's a gorgeous picture of a red wolf running with its collar. And again, that collar, if you see it, if you're looking at a red wolf, it's going to be obvious. It's not going to be one that, is covered up by fur or anything like that. But red wolves are very social animals, and they live in close-knit packs. Typical packs consist of a family group. So you're talking about maybe 5 to 8 animals, and that includes a breeding adult pair and their offspring of different years. So the older offspring actually will often assist the breeding pair with rearing the most recent pups. So again, that kind of cooperative breeding. Almost all of the offspring between 1 and 2 years of age will leave the pack or disperse to form their own pack. And so red wolves tend to form pair bonds for life and mate once a year in February. So again, another reason to celebrate, right? So pups are typically born in April or May, and they're in well-hidden dens. They're kind of tucked away, and those could occur in hollow trees, stream banks, like up on sand knolls. Like dens have been found, in actual holes dug into the ground near forest debris piles. So they're very smart with their choices and keeping it very well hidden. Fewer than half of the wolf pups born in the wild will actually survive to adulthood. And survival rates are actually affected by disease, predation, and malnutrition, right? It's tough when you got to find your own food and feed yourself and hunt it down. Being a top predator is not an easy task. Red wolves have very specific territories that they actively defend against other canids, including other wolves, coyotes, etc. So, and foxes. They're most active, they're crepuscular, so dawn and dusk, right? And then they're actually pretty elusive and avoid humans and human activities as much as possible. So the primary threat to red wolves is actually human-caused mortality. This could be, you know, people shooting them because they're afraid of them or they think they're too close, but a nice majority of them are actually from vehicle strikes. And again, we talked about before how they're leaving these family packs sometimes, you know, at 1 or 2 years of age. So now, in addition to all the other challenges of survivorship, they have to navigate roads. They have to understand speeding vehicles. They have to, you know, and that's just so much of a learning curve and so much more wildlife. Vehicle mortalities are just really hurting these populations. So another thing is that with habitat fragmentation and increasing development, that attracts another canid, coyotes, who are also very expert generalists in terms of food and habitat preferences. And so they can actually directly compete with red wolves for these resources. But in addition to that, the extra interaction can also introduce diseases and, of course, interbreed and dilute the red wolf's genetic lines through hybridization. So this is pretty true when a pack has lost one of the adults from the breeding pair close to a mating season. And additionally, parts of eastern North Carolina, where the current red wolf population is located, are potentially subject to sea level rise as a result of climate change. So that could also pose a threat to losing portions of their current range, which losing any of that land could be pretty detrimental overall to a species that's already really fighting the good fight to survive. Hopefully you want to see a baby red wolf. Look at that. So cute. So in March of 2021, the service actually developed a release plan to resume reintroductions of captive red wolves in North Carolina. And again, that was amended in 2021. So these goals are going to include pursuing opportunities to foster captive-born wolf pups into wild litters, releasing at least one pair of captive red wolves into National Wildlife Refuge lands in North Carolina, and then closely monitoring the results of those efforts. They want to have a plan to conduct additional resources over the coming year based on the results that they've achieved. And so another kind of project that's happening with this is a vegetation management project, and it's designed to support prey base for red wolves. And this is occurring on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and it's actually moving forward into the planning stages. So this is something that the groundwork began in the fall of 2021, but it's actually being done with collaboration with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. So any questions on that? Donna, I see you're requesting control. Do you want me to?
No, I don't need control.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Looks like we have a question from Stacy.
Okay.
Hi, not necessarily only in relation to the red wolves, but has there been any conversations in North Carolina about doing wildlife bridges?
Yes, so I'm so glad you brought that up. So North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission is actually in partnership with NCDOT, Department of Transportation, and there are a few select areas where they do actually have projects underway right now. And we've all, these are areas where we've noticed a lot of like high mortalities and, for instance, black bear, and many other species that need help getting around. And we've also put up cameras that have documented wildlife using these areas and for successful crossings. And most of these areas, I think there is a decision-making process. It's not just based on the mortality rates, although that's pretty significant because we look at the habitat around it, but also higher use areas that are close to good habitat. Essentially, we want to make sure that we can have that be connected. So I'm not sure how many they have on the books, but I know that that's something that I'm pretty sure I can look on our website and see if I can't tease that information out and send that on later for people that are interested.
Thank you. That's great to hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll chime in here, Stacy. Our January program was actually on that very topic. So if you want to go back and see the recording of that program, you can find it. I think if you go to our website, you'll be able to find a link there to the our YouTube channel, and you can look for that program. I think we called it Wildlife Connectivity. So yeah, so you can find information on that also.
Awesome. And I know that they were also doing programs, I think with DOT, maybe the power companies out in the mountains with the northern flying squirrel populations. They were trying to extend from the big poles, the power line poles and things like that. They were trying to construct these landings that extended out a good, like several feet over the road so that they could have a running head start before they start, releasing the protagium and just kind of gliding over so that they had less likelihood of being hit by like trucks and things like that.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah.
And I just put that wildlife connectivity webinar in the chat box in case anyone wants to reference that.
Awesome, thank you. And I realize I still have 3 species to get through, and I don't want to hold everybody that long. I know we've only got 15 minutes. How do you want me to just open it up for general questions now and then record the rest and send that to you later, or how would you like for that to?
Do you have time to do one of them?
I do. I don't know. So the choices are eastern diamondback, alligator, and piping plover.
Let's go with the alligator.
Okay. Well, then we'll zoom past the diamondback. All right, guys, this is just as interesting. Okay, so we'll start off with our alligator here. Definitely one that's on the coast predominantly. If you have an alligator in Charlotte, I'll be shocked. Definitely newsworthy. But we are starting to notice our alligators moving a little bit further up our riverways, and that's simply because of saltwater intrusion. So we're decreasing that wedge when we dig out these big ports for these giant TEU vessels, or CEU vessels, I think they are, that are coming from China and other places. And every time we dredge, we pull out that natural, basically, bank that prevents that dense salt water from actually flowing further upstream. And so with that, alligators are actually kind of moving further and further into some of those more inland areas. So who knows, it could be possible. But if you're talking about the coolest, longest lived reptile, the American alligator has had ancestors that have survived over 252 million years ago. It is state listed as threatened. So another reason I kind of bring this up and bring it home to Charlotte folks is that a fossil of one of the ancestors, the Carnifex carolinensis, is one of the oldest and earliest diverging crocodilomorphs, which is kind of the group for, how we had the order was pulled out of. But this was discovered in 2003 in Chatham County, North Carolina. So the order Crocodilia originated about 231 million years ago during the Mesozoic era, and they are possibly the largest surviving lineage of land invertebrates, sorry. So to give you some perspective of that timeline, dinosaurs died out about 65 million years ago at the end of the Cretaceous period. So having, like I said, the order Crocodilia, which is what our American alligator is a descendant of, that was originated 231 million years ago, I think you can put your fantasies away of, your T-Rex. So the males can actually be larger than almost 8 feet, but in North Carolina, we're at the northernmost point of their range, their habitat range. And, you're going to start to see things like that change and shift as well, climate change, because, what used to be temperate is now subtropical and so forth. So gators living in North Carolina may not be as large or grow as fast as their counterparts, say in Georgia, Florida, and along the Gulf. But here, a large male is basically anything that's over 8 feet. It takes a male an average of 14 to 16 years to actually reach 6 feet. You're probably thinking, well, 6 feet, that's a nice height, that's sexy. Well, the reason we care about how long it is, 6 feet is actually when the American alligator reaches sexual reproduction. And I don't know that we figured out the puzzle as to why that is, but females take an average of 18 to 19 years to reach 6 feet long. So the next time you happen to be seeing an alligator in the water, notice the tail is half the length of the alligator. So if you only see a portion of it, a good way to measure, and you can look at this picture and try to find out, if you eyeball the distance between the snout and the eyes, so those 2 ridges there, If you guesstimate what that is in inches, that gator is about that big in feet. Now, if you want to be super specific, you can look at the, like, I think it's like the 3rd digit on the back foot and however long that toe is. But honestly, if I can measure that, I'm way too close and I'm about to be a snack and I deserve it, right? So just a general estimate, but also if you see the tail, just know that's about half of the gator there, right? So there are definitely some state records that are out there. I think I know we had a male gator that was 12.5 feet. And it weighed about 475 pounds. And then there was a female that was 8 feet long. And, you know, it's impolite to ask her weight, so we didn't bother. But they can eat as much as 1/5 of their body weight, which is pretty impressive. And in fact, I think I probably need to add this article in about how unique an alligator's heart is and how it's able to actually shunt blood flow to its stomach during periods where it's eating, and then also, you know, move it from the stomach and then move it to the brain. So clearly evolved very well to do what it does. And then I know a lot of people believe alligators are voracious predators. They eat all the time. While they are ambush predators and they just pop out of that water and grab their prey and surprise them, they definitely have periods of time where they don't need to eat. Being a reptile, they're cold-blooded. So, you know, they need that warmth in order to metabolize, in order to digest. They have very acidic stomachs, and their optimal feeding temperatures are going to be about 82 to 92 degrees. If you ever see an alligator yawning, it's not because he had a rager, it's because he's releasing heat, like you'll sometimes see birds do. And scientists are actually also studying the American alligator because, you know, when we lose a tooth, if we're not kids, we're kind of screwed, right? We don't really get that back. But the dental lamina that we actually have in the gums, gators have that, and it's very active. And so they have about 74 to 80 teeth that fit in their mouth. But it's almost like you have a stack of cups. So that, you know, again, ambush predator, you're biting down on a deer or a bird or something like that. A toothless alligator isn't going to be around very long, right? So they're going to lose a tooth that's going to come off in something. So it's like dropping a cup off that solo stack. Another tooth is going to drop down to replace it. And it's hollow on the inside. It just drops in. So alligators can replace up to 2,000 to 3,000 teeth in their lifetime. So dentists and others are studying to see how we can kind of activate that in ourselves so that instead of using implants or dentures, humans can kind of reactivate that so that we can actually have our own teeth regenerate. Another cool thing that you share with the alligators, but you know, we've kind of let fall to the wayside because we haven't been evolving as much, this little pink dot that's in the corner of your eye. Okay, this is actually what's left over of your nictitating membrane. So if you've ever seen an alligator wink at you, you know, they can do like we do, up and down, but they can also have a protective layer that's like a shark that goes side to side, and it kind of covers up their eye to protect it from any kind of damage, because most likely the food they're eating is either going to have teeth, sharp beaks, big sharp nails, you know, scales, fins. So, you know, they need to kind of protect that eye because, you know, toothless is bad, but toothless and blind is really not happening in the wild. And here you can see the mama with the baby. So this is also a hint that this is a female, because when babies are this young, see the yellow bandings on them? This is kind of a great picture because you see the color of the vegetation. So oftentimes, if I'm looking for babies, I will go to areas that have aquatic vegetation. So I'm talking about not just duckweed, but some of the floating vegetation, we call it some of the slang terms, alligator weed, other things like that. And the babies actually just bounce directly on the weeds or the plants and eat small crustaceans and fish and insects and things like that. But it camouflages them perfectly because the way the sun hits them and they're in all this vegetation. So it goes along with the bands of that coloration and it really hides them. They'll lose that coloration about 3 years of age, 3 to 4 years of age. And usually every 3 years, a female is ready to breed again. So, of course, our gators inhabit our freshwater areas. Typically, you don't find gators in saltwater areas, although they have been known to visit the beach occasionally. Sometimes gators will actually go to the beaches for a number of reasons. One, they may be a young gator and they got kicked out by a big, you know, flashy male that wants all the lady gators in his little harem pond. And so the younger gators either get kicked out and they go willingly, or they get torn up. So sometimes they do that because they're just not sure where they're going to go. But, you know, they have scutes. And so underneath those scutes, you get things like ticks and mites and stuff, other irritants. Saltwater will kill that. So sometimes they just go and roll around in the saltwater, and that kind of kills off what's bothering them. But this is where we currently have alligators. And so, of course, we have an alligator management plan to manage those populations in each particular area. Now we're talking about threats. Look at how we estimate the human population to change. Now, 2030 is not very far off. So the human population as of 2016 was 2.6 million when they first drew this up. And, you know, by 2030, they're really expecting the numbers to just go off the page. But 2.6 million living in the coastal plain, what is that, like 6 years ago? Like, it's insane. You know that that's doubled, if not. I mean, it's definitely growing. You could see by the coloration how things are changing. The lighter colors is just blowing up. And so because of that development, because of the increase in human populations, we're seeing a huge and significant decrease in habitat. Because, of course, if you're going to be on the coast, you want to be near water because that's the whole attraction, right? And so in addition to seeing populations grow, we have, as an agency, have gotten a lot of calls about alligators. So we welcome any constituent to call us and tell us about wildlife. It could be a concern, a complaint. It could be a, I saw the coolest thing. We love those calls too. But we call them human-wildlife interactions, okay? And so as human populations continue to expand, we get a lot more calls. So as you can see, the number of calls has gone up and, you know, and almost doubled in some instances in just 10 years time, 9 years time. And so that's because with increased development, we have more potential for human and alligators to interact. But we also have a lot of folks that move here because they love what's in coastal North Carolina, but they move into communities that don't inform them that we have alligators. And so that's a very big concern for them. Another addition to that is that the whole not in my yard idea or logic, right? So I see, you know, one alligator, that's cool. Two, I'm overrun. You know, I see a 6-foot alligator. Oh, well, that's too big. It's going to eat me. We got to put it out, right? We got to go push it somewhere else. It's got to go. It's a threat. Well, again, it takes like 14 to sometimes 20 years for a gator to reach 6 feet to even be able to reproduce. I mean, that's a long time. It's really hard to kind of replace that population. One of the features of an alligator, you can kind of see it on the photo on the left. If you look at the top two scoots, it almost looks like there's a pudge in the middle. So I know we've all seen the patterning of a gator, like down the back, right? And it looks like they have this nice ridge going down. So gators actually have built-in solar panels. So I don't know, is my picture showing it all still?
Yes,
it is. Okay. I got some props. So this is the bone. Can y'all see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, this is the bone that's giving it that 3D look. And you might see all the little dimples that are in that scoot. These are areas where blood vessels are actually coming up, rising to just below the surface of that nice dark black leathery skin. And so as the sun hits it and hits that color, it's kind of, you know, given that increased surface area, and it heats the blood, and then it continuously recirculates back into this modern day dinosaur. So, you know, that's why basking is so important for these gators, because not only are they charging their batteries, but, you know, they're also doing all the other processes that they need to do and function with. And this is a way to really increase efficiency. And I also have an alligator tooth here. So I don't know if you can see the hollow, but it's literally like, you can probably hear the whistle, but hollow tooth that just falls out and then gets replaced. So getting back to developments and how those pose a threat to gators, a lot of coastal communities have to change the landscape that they're on, because typically they're building on wetlands, they're building on areas where, you know, you have decreased elevation, so water runs down. And so in order to do that, they make what used to be basically retention ponds, but they make them look like a very beautiful fixture. They put fountains in them. They don't put fencing around it. They make it seem like it's an attractive feature when really all it is runoff so that they don't flood the houses. So with these waterways, these are like artificial, these are like natural ponds for gators. So they're going to be attracted to these gators. So oftentimes there's no signage about this. The HOAs and other parties don't mention this. Gators move, they do migrate, and they will move on their own. Because again, you either have an older male that's pushing you out, you're trying to find, maybe your pond is out of fish. You know, there's several reasons why they're going to move on. But so a lot of communities need more information on how to coexist with gators, as well as to be very vocal participants in management with gators too, right? So a lot of that comes from education. Just because you see a gator doesn't mean you're going to die. Doesn't mean it's a potential threat. What it does mean is don't go walking around, you know, your little chihuahua or anything like that around the edge at night, right? So getting back to that nictitating membrane, that eye that closes sideways. So gators, like cats, have elliptical eyes, and that's to maximize the amount of light in low light situations. Gators feed when it's dark, like early morning, early evening, so they're kind of crepuscular effect, because that gives them the visual advantage over their prey. So an unsuspecting prey comes up to the water's edge, getting a drink, grabs them up and drags them down, does the death roll, drowns them, tucks them up underneath some rotted tree logs or roots and things like that. Little nature's crock pot cooking, getting that meat nice and tender, come back and eat on it for a couple days, right? So just knowing their habits will tell you. Gators on land are really kind of clumsy looking. They have, doesn't mean stand up, you know, and have about 3 to 4 feet to them, but it's like watching a fat dog with thick legs try to run that are really short. I mean, you know, they might put up a little bit of a struggle for a couple feet. As long as you don't roll an ankle, you're going to outlast them. So I know people say, you know, with gators and bullets running zigzags, don't do it. Just run straight, because if you turn or you twist an ankle, you're going to be dinner, right? So getting back to communities, here's a perfect example. No, those are not all gators out there. Those are Canada geese. But there are some lakes that you can go out to, or ponds, and you go out with a big deer spotlight and you shine it, and you see all the eye shine, the red eye shine from the gators. And those are just the ones looking back at you, right? But anyway, so communities basically are going to have a responsibility to recognize and take proactive steps to coexist with alligators. Some of this can include fencing, you know, to try to, or culvert grading. That'll kind of slow down the gators. It'll keep them from moving in, because there's a grate in front of them. They can't go into these areas. Fencing, anybody that has a water structure like that and it's not fenced in has a legal liability, truly, of somebody drowning. More so than from gators, probably, unless they're just not paying attention. But so, you know, signage is also important, but, you know, I always joke, it's not for the gators, it's for the people. And a lot of times people don't read the signs, or they ignore them, or they'll even balance on them, you know, while they're feeding a gator. So there's a reason we don't feed gators. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But if you're a community planner, or you have seen an alligator in your area, you know, just keep in mind that I hate to say it, but they were here first. You know, we are in their habitat. You saw how small their range is. They don't have options, and the options they have are really starting to close in on them. So another thing about gators is naturally, fed gator is a dead gator, but naturally gators are going to be shy and fearful of humans. So you'll know when you're too close to an alligator that has not been fed, because they'll dip down in the water. They're like, oh, geez, not her, right? They don't want to be noticed, because you have to remember, as long as they are in the water, you're a good 5-6 foot plus tall vertically. That's intimidating to a gator, right? If you're in a kayak, you know, you have that length as well that they assume is you. But when you feed a gator, then they start to associate you with food. They lose that natural fear of humans. And when that happens, you have aggression. You have them coming at you like with that speed, that top speed in the water. On land, they can run about 35 miles per hour. But again, over a very short distance, right? Because they're ambushed. It's like they got all the, and then that's it. But it may be just enough to catch you. So with gators, I've seen people throw marshmallows at them because they want to get a good picture. I've seen foam trays floating from where people have brought meat and just dumped it in there, chicken legs, things like that. But also feeding gators could look like somebody leaving fishing bait, dumping it in a waterway that has gators there. We just encourage you not to dispose of it that way, because the other issue with gators in this area, like most people, tourists like to visit the coast. It's beautiful. It has the beach, you know, that's the main draw. There's a lot of wetland areas surrounding it, because you can't have a beach without a marsh. And then as you get to a marsh and you increase elevation, you get the inland ponds, ephemeral, all that jazz. But they come and they see the gators and they're like, oh, this is great. So they do all the bad behaviors. They feed them, they throw rocks at them, they harass them, they do all this stuff. And then they go home. And so then the locals are left with dealing with these gators who now are deemed aggressive, right? So that's kind of where we have to embody a kind of conservation mindset to help steer those visitors in the appropriate direction. And part of maintaining a safe distance from gators is also another way to make sure that they feel comfortable in their environment and that they don't feel the need to exhibit any aggressive behaviors. And I mainly say that during the breeding season, right? So, you know, during your summer months. So like, let's see, April, May, June, July. Those are the months that you really want to be careful with, and also August. I'm sorry, my cat is literally climbing up the screen on my windshield right now, or window. Anyway, so that is when a mother is going to stay really close to her, her pod, which is her babies, right? When they're born, I mean, you're talking about 6 inches. They're tiny. Great blue herons can come in and snatch them up and eat them, whip them around and grab them up. Raccoons, a lot of animals actually predate on eggs or hatchlings. So when it comes to the mothers protecting them, they will literally cross a pond, super speed, to come at you and rush you to get you away from the edge of the pond. So, you know, she's protecting her babies. This is the only reptile that actually sticks around and hangs out with her babies for 2 to 3 years until she's ready to have more. Part of that is also to protect it from the males, the bigger, stronger males that would literally just kill them. So basically, another thing you can do is keep your pets on a leash. Don't, you know, if you got a lab that likes to catch things or retrieve things, don't throw it in a body of water that has gators in it, right? They're just going to think, oh, that's the size of a young deer. That's great, fun size, right? So, you know, as a pet owner and as a parent and, you know, just as a responsible citizen, we just have to keep these things in mind because, you know, you can't read the rules to the alligators, but also remember the whole point of having wildlife that we can conserve for future generations is to also conserve you know, how they survive, their behavior, those sorts of things as well. So, so just any waterway, just be cautious around if you haven't been familiarized with it before. Now, if coexisting doesn't work, so sometimes gators will do things like they've had them stopped on the roadways and blocking traffic around Lake Waccamaw. Sometimes, you know, they'll climb fences, short fences and things like that, and they can cause property damage. You know, basically, what we consider to be a problem gator or an aggressive gator is one that's in a situation that poses a danger to the gator. And I know you're like, well, wait a minute, I thought it was for me. But we also think about the gator's welfare and how they're going to survive. Like if the habitat is perfect for them, but there's other things that are going to threaten them, like somebody's threatening to come back and kill it for no reason or think they won't get caught or they're going to just do mean things, you know, that's something that we look at as well. Now, North Carolina is currently the only state that has an alligator relocation program. Okay, all other states actually euthanize them or they move them into meat or hide farms or, you know, some of the wildlife farms that you go to where you see the giant alligator ponds and they're all over each other. To avoid going that route, we have to ensure that we make sure that we continue responsible relocation decisions so that we can provide them hopefully with a brighter future for situations where there is no alternative. We have a very unsupportive community of having a gator there. Development plans are altering that, altering the habitat, connectivity, those sorts of things. And so some of the things we think about are food conditioned gators. If you don't know if you're around a gator that's been fed, just take up a stick, break it into little pieces, kind of chuck it in the water. And if that gator makes a beeline for those sticks and it's not breeding season, chances are that gator's been used to being fed. Now, I would say just back up because normally, you know, they can kind of get over that. In instances where our biologists go out and tag gators, like in Lake Waccamaw and other areas like that, they also do, you know, a little bit, I mean, I know it's harassment, but really it's hazing. And so they do things to kind of like, not to scare the gators, basically, like make loud noises, do things like that. And plus when they're catching and handling them to measure them and you know, take biological data and then re-release them, that tells the gator, hey, I have had this reinstated fear of people, so I'm not going to be as available and I'm not going to, you know, kind of, I'm not saying once you have a fed gator that you can kind of breed that out of them, but it kind of helps restore that natural fear and that natural balance without causing real harm to the gator or putting that gator, it's preventing that gator from being in a situation in the future where maybe somebody doesn't have the best intentions in mind for them. So one issue with relocation is, and we're still studying how well people or gators actually survive upon relocation, because a lot of times a home range is very important to a gator, very important to any animal species. If you know where everything is, your place for cover in bad weather, your food, good place for mates, you know where you stand in the social dynamics, all those things. You know, it's really hard when you're just dumped in a new location, even though the habitat might be ideal, to find those things depending on the season or just your size or just in general. That can be really difficult adjustment periods for gators. So we tried our best not to relocate again, because the gator already typically has an ideal situation. It's only when that gator is threatened their life that we worry. And so the Endangered Species Act provision for threatened species actually increases management flexibility for states, for our natural resource management agencies like Wildlife Resource Commission. And so this basically is saying that that you can take, so kill, wound, trap, or move is defined by the act, individuals of a threatened species in pursuit of conservation programs for the species. And again, typically we're following best management practices for alligators and what to do. So just a really brief, I'm wrapping up here. The commission owns over 225,000 acres within the range of gators. 60% is wetlands. We're hoping to get ahead of this and get in the future of sea level rise. Again, that's saltwater intrusion, so that we can continue to offer viable habitat for these gators to continue in. We also review permits for you know, large bodies of water that aren't protected. And then landowners, we also have the Alligator Management Assistance Program, where landowners can help manage habitat. There's also in certain counties that I think are, the cities actually have to request it, or the municipalities have to request a hunt where they feel there's areas where there's a high distribution of gators to the human population. And so those are on a case-by-case basis. So they're not just willy-nilly, and it's definitely not something that's passed out. So if you're curious about who to contact, and this is the slide that I'm going to kind of end on, the Wildlife Helpline is basically a hotline for our biologists, not seasonal summer interns or anything like that. So, you know, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, you can call this hotline. You may have to wait a little bit. We get a lot of calls, or you can send an email, and we're going to have a biologist get back to you. And more importantly, if your issue requires maybe more assistance or you have more questions, we can also direct you to a regional biologist in your area that is familiar with exactly what's going on, or maybe it's something that they have to take you know, more active management measures. So also we have our wildlife enforcement hotline. So if you know of somebody intentionally feeding, harming, or harassing or poaching an alligator, you can call and report it. It's very hard without catching them actually in the act to do anything about it. But and we also don't want you to put yourself in a very unsafe position. You know, a lot of times people that feed alligators are intoxicated. It's been a trend. And sometimes they're just downright rude and they don't care. And so we don't want you to be in an altercation or a position where you feel vulnerable either. But this is also a hotline that you can call if you feel like any other wildlife is being abused, poached, things like that. You know, if you think that there's a transgression going on, you can always call this hotline and they'll be able to figure out what action needs to be taken. So, with that up, I guess I'll just leave my contact information up. Sorry we didn't get to the pipe and plover, but I know I ran over and I'm sorry, but any questions or comments or things you'd like to share? I know some people have to go, so I'll also just turn it back to Charlotte Wildlife Stewards if you have any comments that you want to put out there before people sign off.
Yes. Go ahead. Who was that? Go ahead.
I think it might have just been an echo.
Oh, it was my echo. Okay. Well, anyway, well, thank you, Rebecca, Becky. And if you feel like you want to record those other information on those other species and then just attach that, send that to me or Madison, that would be great. And this is so full of information. I mean, I would love to just go on, but I know people have to leave. So I'd like to thank everybody that's been here. And just one thing that I forgot to mention at the very beginning when I was talking about volunteers is that if anybody in Charlotte has experience with Wix, with that website platform, please let us, and you want to help us, or if you would like to, we would love for you to reach out to us. We have the sitemap set up, but it's the actual mechanics of how we go in and put our content in and move it around and make the website look like we want it to look. We need some help with that. So you could just email us at our Charlotte Wildlife Stewards at gmail.com. And with that, I will say good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. If anybody else has any other questions, just feel free to email me and I can get you answers.
Right. Thanks. Great job.
Yeah, thanks y'all so much. I appreciate you coming.